Thank you all for joining us tonight for Anti-Semitism at ASU, Being Jewish on Campus. We are fortunate to have a robust lineup, and so I'm going to dive right into it. My name is Debbie Yunker Kail, and I'm the Executive Director for the Hillel Jewish Student Center at ASU. Now in my 8th year, I'm grateful for countless opportunities to build strong connections with our Jewish Studies department, as well as many key leaders at ASU, all for the betterment of the ASU student experience. Tonight, we will discuss how to teach anti-Semitism, national trends about anti-Semitism on campus, students' experiences, as well as current ASU resources. We will have time for Q&A at the end, and I invite you to place your questions in the Q&A box throughout the evening. We will address them all at the end of our formal presentation. To begin, I wanted to welcome Dr. Tiffany Ana Lopez, a foundation professor and vice provost for inclusion and community engagement at Arizona State University. In her role, she serves as a collaborative partner with the campus community, helping to better realize the mission of our charter. In her previous role as director of the School of Film, Dance, and Theater, Dr. Lopez led the film program's launch into the newly named Sidney Poitier New American Film School. She also served as senior advisor to the Dean on Equity Practices and Engagement in the Herbert Institute for Design and the Arts. A first-generation college student, her scholarship and creative practice focus on how storytellers address trauma and violence to create paths for personal transformation and social change. Among her awards, she is a recipient of an ASU Faculty Women's Association Outstanding Faculty Mentor Award and numerous grants and fellowships from the Mellon Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Rockefeller Foundation. She is a national presenter on equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and leadership in higher education, and we're so grateful that she could join us this evening to hear from our presenters and greet you all.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be stepping into this new role and very, very excited about this panel tonight because it's just such an important and critical moment for this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I'll now transition to our first presenter. And I just want to say I'm so grateful for the partnership that Hillel has with Jewish Studies. This is in fact one of 2 events that Hillel and Jewish Studies are co-sponsoring just this week for the ASU community. Hava Tirosh-Samuelson is a Regents Professor of History, Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism, and Director for Jewish Studies at Arizona State University. An intellectual historian, she writes on Jewish philosophy and mysticism, religion and ecology, and religion, science, and technology. She's the author of the award-winning Between Worlds, The Life and Thoughts of Rabbi David Ben Judah Messer Leon, Happiness in Pre-Modern Judaism, Virtue, Knowledge, and Well-Being, and Religion and Environment, The Case of Judaism. She is also the editor of 30 books, including the Library of Contemporary Jewish Philosophers, a set of 21 volumes that feature outstanding Jewish thinkers today. Please join me in welcoming Hava Tirosh-Samuelson.
Thank you, Debbie. And I'm going to go right into this rather painful and very worrisome subject, the revival of anti-Semitism. Well, as you all know, it has been revived all over the world, including the United States and including college campuses. Let's give some numbers. In 2020, in Germany, where 120,000 Jews live, there has been a rise of 11% in attacks on Jews. As according to one person, that means about 6 attacks per day. And out of the 2,275 anti-Semitic incidents, only 5 suspects were arrested. That means that there is no real or no sufficient enforcement of the laws against expression of anti-Semitism. In Germany, we see a very troublesome situation in which there is a connection between anti-Semitism and the COVID-19 pandemic. Since the pandemic revived anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and according to the most vicious theory, it's the Jews who are responsible for spreading the disease the world over. Germany is by no means the only place where this happens. It happens also in places such as Madrid, where there was a recent march of fascist paramilitary groups, and speeches were delivered in which the slogan, "The Jew is the culprit," was the major refrain. We also have marches like that in Bulgaria, in Sofia, Bulgaria, that actually started since 2003, but this year there has been an attempt to actually cancel the march. And lest we think that this is only a problem in Europe, of course, the Anti-Defamation League reminds us that there were, in 2020 alone, 2,100 acts of assaults, vandalism, and harassment in the United States. And that represents a rise of 12% in comparison to the previous years. We all remember the attacks in Pittsburgh on the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh in October 27, 2018, in Poway Synagogue in California in April 27, 2019. And both of those were motivated by anti-Semitic ideology, one that focuses on the fictional Jewish plot to destroy America by encouraging mass non-white immigration. Of course, you all know, you all remember the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia on August 11 and 12, 2017, when the marchers chanted, "Jews will not replace us." And that march too was an expression of the belief that Jews are masterminding a plot to undermine white supremacy in America by bringing literal boatloads of non-white migrants. So the situation is serious, and it's happening not only in the physical public sphere, but also in cyberspace, where we have a glut, I should say, or inundation of anti-Semitic tweets and retweets. So that problem is real. So increase in anti-Semitism in the past few years is very concerning to all of us. For several decades after the Holocaust, we thought that maybe humanity learns the right lesson from the Holocaust. Anti-Semitism went down a little bit in those immediate decades, but not longer. Today, actually, anti-Semitism is all over, including in universities, which are supposed to be the beacons of enlightenment, civic decency, and tolerance. So how does Jewish studies fit into this very complicated situation? The discipline of Jewish studies, to those of you who are not familiar, is quite old, actually. The discipline, the modern discipline, started in the 1820s in Germany, and it was actually generated by Jews who wanted to study the Jewish history, the Jewish culture, the Jewish religion from a scientific and academic point of view. It was all part of the attempt to modernize Judaism and to push toward the integration of Judaism into contemporary life in Germany at the time. I should remind you, to those who who don't know Jewish history in detail, that Jews have been excluded and discriminated against and prosecuted in Europe, not just in Germany, but throughout Europe for centuries before. But things did start to change at the end of the 18th century with the French Revolution and the ideals of the Enlightenment, which led in a very long and complex process to granting civil rights and legal rights to Jews. We call that process the emancipation, and it really undergirds the conditions of modern Jewish existence. Now, here comes the irony and the tragedy. Just as the process of emancipation was completed roughly around 1870, so it's a process that lasted about a century, that's when we get the concept of anti-Semitism as a new terminology. It's a new kind of a terminology based on the pseudoscientific category of race. And according to that, Jewish otherness is a matter of biology. It's not just based on religious difference, but it's based on biology, which means that it cannot really be changed. If you are biologically Jewish, and the Nazis, of course, claim to be able to prove that, then you are basically doomed. So modern anti-Semitism is much more pernicious and insidious than the pre-modern religious anti-Semitism, to which we also refer to as anti-Judaism. Because in the modern period, anti-Semitism becomes a political ideology. Anti-Semitism was used, especially since the 1870s and on, as by various political parties and movements as a means to an end. So as a political propaganda, the Jew became a symbol for whatever one found problematic or objectionable in the society or in the culture. So anti-Semitism could be used by groups on the political left as well as by groups on the political right. Anti-Semitism was promoted to critique capitalism, but also to critique communism and socialism. By the same token, anti-Semitism was marshaled to critique modernity, industrialization, and urbanization, because presumably Jews were portrayed as the beneficiaries of those processes where everybody else is the victim. The Nazis, of course, made anti-Semitism the organizing principle of their political program, whose goal was to make Europe free of Jews. And this was their attempt to solve the quote unquote Jewish problem once and for all. So we are all familiar with the events from 1933 to 1945, which resulted in the destruction of Jewish life in Europe and the extermination of 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. The problem for me is the fact that even after the Holocaust taught us the most tragic lessons, it seems that the lesson has not been absorbed properly by the society. So let me say a few words about the complexity of defining anti-Semitism. I define anti-Semitism as hatred, hostility, negative perceptions, and persecution of Jews. Anti-Semitism is a multifactorial phenomenon, and it consists of beliefs and attitudes and sentiments, policies, cultural expressions, and actions about and toward Jews. I have to mention that anti-Semitism did not destroy Jewish life. Jewish life always thrived despite of anti-Semitism, but anti-Semitism is problematic because it can be absorbed, the negativity of it can be absorbed by the victims themselves and produce very complex attitude toward life. So anti-Semitism has a lot of harmful impact, I would say, not just on Jews, but on the society at large. If we look at various manifestations of anti-Semitism, here is where things get a little bit complicated or subtle or hidden. For example, if you look at attitudes, their anti-Semitism can consist of various negative attitudes toward Jews. For example, blaming Jews for various ills of the society, or imputing negative deeds to Jews, or portraying Jews negatively in literature, in art, in theater, in television, in media, or feeling antipathy toward Jews, or negating the Jews as a group. These are all attitudes that are negative toward the group as a whole. But anti-Semitism is not just about what you feel or how you react toward the person who is Jewish, but also what does the society do as a whole? And here we see anti-Semitism as a social rejection of Jews. So you can reject Jews as a group by segregating Jews in ghettos. You can force Jews to live only in a particular region. You can exclude Jews from residential neighborhoods, private clubs, or voluntary association. You can create quotas in higher education institutions and not allow Jews to enter. Or you can exclude Jews from certain professions or preventing their advancement in a given profession. So these are all social forms of expressing anti-Semitic attitudes through policies toward Jews. And then finally, we have persecution of Jews, and that is a very large and very painful history of anti-Jewish legislation, of mob attacks on Jews and Jewish institutions, of exiling and expelling Jews, of torturing Jews, and of course, the worst of all, of course, the Holocaust. So all of this together can tell you how complex anti-Semitism is. And if you put the full story together, you can see why negativity has penetrated the perception that Jews have something problematic or worse than that. In the medieval, it was really that there's something criminal or even something subhuman about the Jews. So the negativity of the Jews, the demonization of the Jews, the willingness to associate between the Jews and the devil, or the Jews and the Antichrist, all that can tell you that we are dealing with an irrational, profoundly irrational belief system that unfortunately has penetrated a lot of aspects of the society at large. The most important thing to keep in mind that it can appear on the right as well as the left. It can be conscious as well as subconscious or unconscious. It can be promoted by people who have never met Jews, or it can be promoted by people who want to benefit directly from anti-Semitic propaganda. So what can we do about it here in the university? What we need to do is we need to start by teaching. This is just the beginning. And how do we teach? I think that we do three things. We teach it historically, we teach it in an interdisciplinary way, and we teach it in a comparative way. By historically, I mean that we don't start the story of anti-Semitism with the Holocaust. The Holocaust was the end of the story, not the beginning. To understand anti-Semitism historically, we have to go all the way to antiquity, and we need to take it all the way through the Middle Ages and the early modern period, and finally the modern period. So always teach it historically. Second, we have to keep in mind that it's a multifactorial problem, and therefore we need to bring to bear variety of disciplines, whether it's religion, economics, politics, sociology, psychology, gender studies, even art and culture. All of those disciplines, all of those approaches are relevant to our understanding of anti-Semitism. And finally, we need to bring in a comparative perspective. We need to understand it, how anti-Semitism appears in different places, different societies, different contexts, see what they have in common and when and where they differ. All this we do as part of teaching courses on a BA level. We also teach it on an MA level as part of in the context of a MA program for the study of World War II. And we also do it through a lot of public engagement, public lectures. And I would like to mention one particular initiative that will come to ASU as of May 2021. I refer to the Genocide Awareness Week, where we're going to pay a lot of attention in a variety of modalities to the connection between anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. So all of those phenomena are linked to each other, and we need to do the best we can to understand it. And if you ask me finally, why should we pay so much attention to it? I would say very simply, anti-Semitism is not just about Jews. It doesn't matter only to Jews. It matters to all of us. It is a problem of the society at large, whose underlying sickness or malaise or problematic is expressed in the negation of Jews and Judaism. So the study of anti-Semitism, along with any other topic in Jewish studies, helps us to become more responsible and more engaged citizens. And we would like to encourage all students at ASU to read, to examine, to critique, to challenge, to compare, to contrast, and to ponder all of those aspects that put the complicated story together. So with this in mind, we're going to now listen to Debbie Yunker, Kail, who will tell us a little bit more what happens on college campuses.
Thank you so much, Hava. I'm so grateful to be at a university where we do have such active study of this important topic. So as a reminder, I just wanted to encourage everyone to please place your questions in the Q&A function. We'll be answering them at the end of the night. If you would like to direct your question to a particular panelist, please feel free to mention that in the Q&A. And if you feel like your question has been answered throughout the presentation, feel free to just make a note so that we know where you're standing. I'm going to start by giving a little background about the terms that we're using tonight, and thank you to Hava for doing that as well. And then I'll, of course, share trends on campus nationally and what's happening at ASU. The Jewish people only makes up 0.2% of the world population. We're very small, and sometimes that's surprising to people based on, certain presence that Jewish people may have. And I think that that's often why anti-Semitism feels so rampant. I have a couple definitions of anti-Semitism that I wanted to share this evening briefly. It's really important to have a good definition to understand this complex phenomenon, but it really has to serve as a guide with the understanding that no definition will ever be perfect or comprehensive, and yet we need one to establish a common language. So one definition from the ADL you'll see here right now: belief or behavior hostile towards Jews just because they are Jews, taking the form of religious teachings that proclaim the inferiority of Jews or political efforts to isolate, oppress, or otherwise injure them. I also have brought some images this evening, which are fairly disturbing, I know, to me and probably to many of us, but are important to look this in the face and understand what anti-Semitism has looked like through the years and what it's looking like in modern times. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance also has a definition that was accepted in 2016. And again, while there's not one definition of anti-Semitism, this one has been recently accepted by 50 other American Jewish organizations, including Hillel International. They say anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed towards Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. And here we have an image just from earlier in this calendar year that many of you may have seen on the media. This is one way that anti-Semitism is coming out in modern society. So how does anti-Semitism relate to other forms of hate, and how is it different? It has to be properly understood within this broader matrix of oppression or bigotry, what can be called xenophobia, this intense or irrational hatred and fear of the other that's often characterized by dehumanization, double standards, demonization, stereotypes, scapegoating, and more. It's also really different though, right? So every bigotry, like every bigotry, anti-Semitism has traits that do make it unique. The anti-Semite doesn't consider the Jew the inferior necessarily, but often sees Jews as inordinately powerful, able to control global financial systems, media, the weather. And we see in Eric Ward's quote describing the perception of Jews among white nationalists as the mastermind behind the civil rights movement and progressive causes. He said that because modern anti-Semitic ideology traffics in fantasies of invisible power, it thrives precisely when its target would seem to be least vulnerable. This certainly has a number of implications, leading to people overlooking anti-Semitism, dismissing or deprioritizing it. How could Jews be oppressed if they're powerful or privileged? And creates a lot of challenges that we see on campus. So what is going on campus? Today's Jewish college students are quite diverse, as many of us know and see and live every day. 70% identify as non-Orthodox, coming from household, and of those that do, 70% of non-Orthodox Jewish students have only one Jewish parent. Intermarriage between Jews and non-Jews has increased significantly, and many students are coming to campus having grown up in the household with multiple religious traditions. This is something we certainly see at ASU quite regularly. There's a myth that we hear in anti-Semitism discourse on campus that Jews are white. Well, of course, many are white or are viewed that way. Some might say white passing, but many American Jews are white, but the community is much more racially diverse. Approximately 20% of today's Jewish college students identify as people of color. 20% of Jewish college students identify as having a disability. Many also identify as part of the LGBTQ community or other marginalized identity groups. And something very interesting, 1/3 of Jews born after 1980 identify as Jews of no religion. And so what does that look like for Jews of, as they say, no religion to manifest their identity on campus? So Jewish students express their identity through, in connection to their Jewish identity through ritual, culture, belief, Israel, social justice, family traditions, people, and community, just to name a few. Of course, ritual could look like lighting candles. Culture might look like eating Jewish food. Social justice might mean taking action to repair the world, to act in, with tikkun olam from a Jewish perspective. And many of you may relate in your own personal practices if you identify as Jewish to how how many of these squares resonate for you. So the current climate on campus, we want to dive deeper into how challenging this is. There's a dramatic rise in campus anti-Semitism taking place within the backdrop of rising anti-Semitism in the United States, as you see here with some updated statistics from the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, as well as Hillel International. There's a new-ish Instagram account that some of you may have seen called Jewish on Campus, and it invites students to share anonymous stories. And I just want to read a couple out. These are from a variety of public, private, Ivy, less elite schools, East Coast, West Coast. These things happen everywhere. After returning $5 to a classmate that I had borrowed the day before, he told me he was surprised I pay him back. He said he thought Jews didn't repay after borrowing money. In a meeting for my sorority, one member minimized the presence of anti-Semitism at the university and in the county because Jewish people are white. No one disagreed with her. These small things are happening all the time, and we really need to support students in figuring out how they can speak up for themselves when it's something like this. I also want to speak briefly to anti-Zionism, and I know there have been some questions already in the Q&A about this. I found this Venn diagram really helpful. There are certainly moments when anti-Zionism overlaps with anti-Semitism or with criticism of the state of Israel, but it's really important to acknowledge that criticism of Israel, even harsh criticism, is not necessarily anti-Semitism and is certainly within the bounds of reasonable discourse, and especially in a university environment. It is important to look at how anti-Zionism and criticism of Israel are often expressed in ways that utilize classic anti-Semitic tropes and result in the exclusion or harassment of Jewish students. Here's a definition also from the ADL of what anti-Zionism is: opposing the Jewish movement for self-determination and the right of the Jewish people to a homeland in the state of Israel. It may include anti-Semitism or be motivated by it, but may not. And what happens when anti-Zionism can lead to the exclusion of Jewish students, as we've seen on many campuses across the country, pushing Jewish students out of student government or excluding progressive Jews from social justice spaces. And here are some examples collected by Hillel International and other sources about specific incidents that have happened in recent months. So what does this all look like at ASU? Here's a couple pictures of flyers that we've had on campus in the last couple of years. We have had calls for boycotts of groups that support Israel, and we've had intimidation at events, both of students outside student government events, as well as intimidation at an event bringing Israeli soldiers to campus. Some of these things are clear, classic anti-Semitism. Some of them are those blurry lines between anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism, and legitimate criticism. And no matter what they are, it's really Hillel's role and the university's role to help students figure out where they're at and how they can have productive academic and social lives at ASU. I want to say that we have been fortunate at ASU to be a campus that does not have systemic anti-Semitism. To date, we have not had any ongoing issues with students feeling regular physical or emotional threats. And of course, as I just mentioned, though, this doesn't mean that we're immune. On a public campus that's larger than many US cities, of course, we have our share of challenging incidents. I was really grateful to find a website that's linked in the sources of this presentation that notes several statements that the university has made over the years about anti-Semitism, including this most recent one posted after the flyers were discovered on campus. We've been extremely grateful for our partnership with university leaders, and I'm looking forward to hearing from a couple of them later at this program. So what's Hillel's role? We create a culture of pluralism and inclusion. We build strong, educated Jewish leaders, and we take it really seriously, our role to coach students so that they can feel comfortable speaking up for themselves, whether it's seeing an anti-Semitic flyer on campus or addressing an offhanded comment in their fraternity meeting. Even if things like flyers are from outside groups, which they were in both cases that I mentioned earlier, these things impact students and can often call up a long history of Jewish trauma that students call upon. And so I want to say also something that's a really important role that Hillel plays is helping students figure out what they think when these things happen on campus. You might have one student that says, yep, those are some pieces of paper that got taken down. Great. And another student who's traumatized for weeks because of the family trauma that seeing swastikas on their campus brings up. Those are both legitimate reactions that students have, and certainly everything in between. Just taking a look at what's happening at Hillel this week, I think it's really clear that we focus so much on building these strong, educated leaders. It's Professional Development Week. We're coaching students on resume development and giving them the opportunity to speak with community mentors. We're actively involved in campus relations. Even just tonight, there's a student involved with Hillel being sworn into their new role in the undergraduate student government. There's 3 classes meeting weekly at Hillel. This Friday night, we are co-sponsoring Shabbat with the Jewish Studies Center, offering a Purim class and Shabbat dinner to go in a safe COVID way. And next week, we have a whole week of Purim celebrations to bring joy into the whole week. Our role in the university is also really important. We work with university administrators to educate and advocate for Jewish students' needs. We seek to support and understand other minority students' needs on campus so that we can build strong allyships and recognize places that we still need to grow as a community. We support students that are navigating reporting processes around anti-Semitic incidents. We spend a lot of time encouraging students' involvement on campus, and no matter what the issue is, we refer students to relevant resources: financial aid, counseling, the dean's office, health services. We really do aim to be a one-stop shop for students who need some help navigating the university. Speaking of students, I now want to turn it over to 2 wonderful students who can add a lot of color to the information that I've provided tonight, and I'll introduce them real quickly here. So Caral Zaror is a sophomore studying political science and business law. She's president of Students Supporting Israel and serves as the Israel chair at Hillel. Emily Kaplan is a junior studying political science and psychology. She's a tireless advocate for the Jewish community and is also involved with the Jewish Arizonans on campus, Chabad, and Hillel.
Hi, everyone. My name is Caral Zaror. I am, as Debbie said, currently a sophomore here. I'm double majoring in political science and business law and getting a certificate in disability studies. Most importantly, I am a Jewish student involved in Hillel and the president of our chapter of Students Supporting Israel. My family background is a little complex. I am a descendant from my paternal grandfather, who is an Iraqi Jew, my paternal grandmother, who is a Palestine-born Jew, my maternal grandfather, who is an Argentinian Jew, and my maternal grandmother, who is a Russian Jew. Both my parents were born and raised in Ashdod, Israel, where I also lived for some time. However, I grew up in Queens and Long Island, New York. We left New York before I was even old enough to understand what being Jewish meant to me, and moved here to Peoria, Arizona, where I was the first Jewish person many people had met and was, to my knowledge, the only Jewish person in my grade from middle school to high school. My parents raised me as a more conservative Jew. We celebrated every holiday, ate strictly kosher, and did our kiddush every Shabbat. Beyond the experiences I shared with my family and the ones I had in Israel growing up, I had never really experienced what is commonly known as Jewish life. When I came to ASU, this all changed. I attended something known as Camp Carey the summer before freshman year, and by a twist of fate, the first 2 friends I made at ASU were Jewish. This caused me to get involved in Jewish organizations and events on campus, where I met such a wide and welcoming community of other Jewish students and quickly made many Jewish friends. Never in my life had I experienced a sense of belonging where I felt like everyone had similar values and upbringings until I met my friends at Shabbat dinners. While I never experienced Jewish life outside my family, I was no stranger to anti-Semitism. Throughout my childhood, I faced a lot of different forms of anti-Semitic behavior that didn't even register as that until I was older. From learning about the Holocaust in class and hearing people make jokes about burning Jewish people and saying Hail Hitler, to being forced into a stereotype of, hey, Caral, your nose is too small. Are you sure you're Jewish? And being asked, are you rich? Jewish people are always rich. These little incidents seemed like nothing to me. And looking back, I realized how conditioned I was to believe these things were normal. When I got to college, it seemed like anti-Semitism had evolved past the silly childhood jokes I was used to. Suddenly, it was fires being set to Jewish student centers in Delaware and Jewish fraternity houses being vandalized with swastikas, to even our campus, with pro-Nazi flyers being put up. In one of our classes here at ASU, which was politics class, we were learning about religious freedom, and I brought up a point to my professor personally, which she then expanded on in the next class, which was, how deeply is religion embedded in our society? Because Christian students never have school on Christmas or Easter, their high holidays, but Jewish students have school on all of our holidays, as do Islamic students and students of other religions. She brought this up in front of the class during a lecture because she agreed with my point. The luxury of not having school on holidays was not extended past Christianity. To this, a student raised their hand and said something along the lines of, "That's too bad. This is a Christian majority country, and if you have a problem with that, then don't live here." This really shocked me because I thought it was widely held that this country does not have a designated religion, but rather allows free practice. Yet that student seemed to have a different opinion. This was the first thing that I had experienced at ASU as far as religious equality is concerned. In terms of anti-Semitism, ASU tends to be on the safer side of the spectrum for Jewish students. However, I am a prominent student leader in the Jewish community as the face of SSI, part of Hillel, and an advocate for the Jewish community. If somebody wanted to know who the prominent Jews were on campus, I am a name that would come up. Thus, if someone wanted to plan a hate crime against the Jewish community at ASU, me and my fellow Jewish leaders would be perfect and easy to find targets. This gives a sense of underlying worry, knowing I'm hated by some because of my religion and never knowing when someone will act on this hatred. This is something that I find I worry about way more often than I should have to because of the record-breaking levels of national anti-Semitism, whereas if I were in the same position years ago, I would not be concerned with this. Through all of the anti-Semitism and hate that Jews in America face, we also have the biggest identity struggle to deal with. Where in politics can I have my voice heard? Speaking to a lot of my Jewish friends, I had realized we all struggle with finding a home in politics because on the far right, neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups subscribe to the idea that we should be persecuted, and on the far left, progressives continue to blame Jews for the actions of the Israeli government and mask their anti-Semitism under the guise of anti-Zionism. Because of this, I collaborated with our undergraduate student government to include a definition for anti-Semitism in a bill that was targeted at showing support for the Jewish community after those flyers went up last semester. This was the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA definition. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism lays out the groundwork for what constitutes anti-Semitism, because often people can get away with anti-Semitism because the scope is so broad. The IHRA definition ensures that blaming the Jewish people as a collective or any particular Jewish person for the actions of the Israeli government is considered a form of anti-Semitism, because that's exactly what it is. Jewish people in America are not at all responsible for the actions of a foreign country, even if they are from that country. So much like a student of another nationality would not be blamed for the actions of that foreign government, it is unfair to blame Jews for the actions of the Israeli government. This definition really allowed me to realize that I had more anti-Semitic experiences than I had previously thought, because I didn't realize before that these things were in fact anti-Semitic. Anti-Semitism is so normalized and complex that often even us Jews struggle to notice that it is happening, let alone outsiders and allies noticing that it is happening to us. It is my hope that the Jewish community will someday find their safe space, but until that day, I plan to continue my journey to advocate for us and fight against anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Emily Kaplan, and I am a junior studying political science and psychology. I am a proud Jew, even though I didn't grow up that way. I grew up secularly, only celebrating Hanukkah, thinking it was the most important holiday, later finding out about this thing called high holidays like Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. I got involved in the Reform movement in high school after being one of only 2 Jews at my school. After much reluctance, I decided to go to my first Jewish event, and it all took off from there. I fell in love with the community and the message of Tikkun Olam, repairing the world. My junior year, I traveled to Poland and Israel. My connection to my identity grew, and with that, curiosity. I started to gain an interest in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and was seeking to educate myself and learn from others. My senior year, I did my senior research project about the impact of the Holocaust on Jewish identity. I was fortunate enough to intern at a Holocaust museum and had the opportunity to give tours and meet with Holocaust survivors. I once remember giving a tour to a group of high school students that had very little knowledge of the Holocaust, let alone that there were survivors. In high school, I experienced anti-Semitism through forms of stereotypes and jokes. The Holocaust wasn't a big deal. Hey, Emily, pick up that coin. Jews love money. You have such a Jew nose. These instances were just the beginning of my understanding of anti-Semitism. These experiences combined furthered my passion and interest into my identity. Starting college, I became more involved in Jewish life, attending Chabad and Jack, which I felt even more in love with traditions and culture. I felt like I finally had a community. However, with entering college, I came to discover a different kind of anti-Semitism, softcore anti-Semitism. Now, my parents grew up in the Soviet Union, so they had a much different experience growing up, as my father was bullied and beaten because he was a Jew. I'm fortunate that I didn't have that experience in anti-Semitism, and with each generation, there are different and new challenges. The anti-Semitism they experienced, though different and arguably worse, does not take away from the anti-Semitism of my generation. Different generations face their own challenges, and I believe the struggle with anti-Semitism in my generation stems from the fact that it is not always obvious these days. Subtle anti-Semitism seems to pop up everywhere, from social media to politics to college campuses. Because the anti-Semitism my generation faces is more hidden, it is much more difficult to identify and therefore combat, because where is the line? We all know Nazis and swastikas are bad, and yes, that's obvious. But now we are facing subtle anti-Semitism, things that sound questionable, but are hard to gauge where they stand on the anti-Semitism scale. When white supremacists march in Charlottesville saying Jews will not replace us, that is much different than denying Jewish indigeneity to Israel and claiming that we have no right to exist there, but it is still anti-Semitic. So it is much more difficult in identifying anti-Semitism nowadays because people have justifications for everything. That wasn't anti-Semitic, that was just anti-Israel. Now, it wasn't until I came to college that I discovered an entirely new realm of anti-Semitism: social media. Social media has the power of influence and is oftentimes used as an echo chamber for dangerous ideologies to thrive, spread, and manifest. I have witnessed firsthand anti-Semitism, from Holocaust denial to Jewish space lasers. Anti-Semitism is everywhere on the internet, and the worst part about it is I can report it as many times as I want, but nothing happens. It is easy to be hateful on social media these days, as there's no real life consequences. Although sometimes a good tool, it can be just as dangerous. And I believe that is my generation's challenge: combating anti-Semitism on an entirely different scale, a platform that encourages a false reality. Social media and reality are two very different things. So when you try to have a conversation with somebody in person, and then you go later to see on their Instagram, they're posting ideologies that they would never say to your face, it creates this barrier, and it creates this false sense of productiveness, false sense of reality that a conversation was actually ever happening. This is a problem even in our community here at ASU, where we have student government senators. We have student members who portray themselves in person as one thing and then go to social media accounts and say another. This gap is a dangerous reality, and I, along with my peers, are much too familiar with it. Because of this gap between what is real and what is not, oftentimes we get so heated, we start to see one another for a label and our politics instead of our humanity. I've continuously strived to speak with those who don't agree with me or share the same viewpoints, because I value dialogue. And in order for me to form a concrete opinion, personally, I just want to hear and understand all sides of the story. It's important to me to have people who are open-minded and willing to challenge their own beliefs. Both people need to come to the table, and many are not prepared for that challenge because it's just much easier to not question your own stances. Now, this is obviously something that I'm still working hard at, to combat my own biases and to challenge myself. But it's not an easy thing to do. There were two main events that took place at ASU that really solidified this idea for me. One was the protest at an IDF event, in which I told the staff, we have to let some of the protesters in. Otherwise, we're proving their point and creating a barrier for dialogue. The other was a more unpleasant experience, in which after a USG meeting, Jewish students were harassed by some random member of the public, in which she told me personally, go back to where you came from, and that all Jews are from Europe and white. Now, obviously, if you're Jewish, you know that this is far from the reality. These two events pushed me even further into my passion to combat anti-Semitism and hear the other side. Obviously, though, only if they're willing to civilly come to the table and not yell. But with all these events and experiences, I'm grateful that I have a strong Jewish community at ASU that supports me through it all. They guide us, help, and provide resources for when we need it. Now, ASU is not a hotbed for anti-Semitism, and I know other campuses that have things much worse. That's not to say that ASU doesn't have its issues, but we have a strong administration and community. When these experiences occurred, I reached out to Dean Aska, and she set up a meeting with me immediately to talk about how I felt, what she could do, any resources she could provide. I am grateful for the support here. However, that doesn't mean there isn't work to be done. There are students like Kail and I who are passionate in fighting and standing up against all forms of anti-Semitism, and our journey has just begun.
Thank you both so much for sharing your stories and a little bit about yourselves. Again, a reminder to use the Q&A function if you have questions, and we'd be happy to address them to students or anyone else on the panel. Now I'd like to introduce two colleagues of mine at ASU who are going to share a little bit more about what happens at ASU when there is a concern, and more broadly, what ASU is doing to ensure that we have a warm, hospitable environment for all students. Chief Michael Thompson joined the Arizona State University Police Department in May 2008 after spending 20 plus years with the City of Mesa Police Department in a variety of assignments, including sergeant, detective, honor guard, and forensic composite artist. Chief Thompson, I didn't know about the artist thing until I got your bio, so I'm very interested to learn more. Mike has served as a commander at the West Campus, commander of the Support Services Division at the Tempe campus, and an assistant chief of support services of the department, and has been chief of police since 2014. Chief Thompson received a doctorate from ASU's Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College in the Leadership and Innovation program. He has also earned a Master's of Administration and Leadership from Northern Arizona University and a Master of Education from NAU. Cassandra Aska is the Deputy Vice President and Dean of Students at Arizona State University, Tempe campus. She provides leadership and strategic direction to support student success. Through collaborative efforts, Dean Aska fosters a comprehensive student life experience, advancing student involvement, responsibility, service, inclusion, and community. Dr. Aska also serves as the University Chair for the Community of Campus Inclusion, which works to promote diversity and inclusion at ASU. Cassandra has been a member of the Sun Devil family since 2001. She has served in a variety of leadership roles on the West, Downtown, Phoenix, and Tempe campuses. A first-generation college student, Cassandra earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in biology from St. John Fisher College, a Master of Education in Counseling and Student Personnel Services from University of Maryland, College Park, and a Doctorate of Education in Leadership and Innovation from Arizona State University. I'll now turn it back over to you guys.
First, I guess I'll jump in and start. I want to say good evening to everybody who's joining us, and I want to echo the words that Debbie shared, and that is to say thank you to Kail and to Emily for first and foremost sharing your stories and being student voices and advocates for the work that is being done and still needs to be done within our environments. I think the important thing here as I listen to tonight's conversation is that we are a community. Right? We experience challenging things, and Kail and Emily, listening to your stories, they are real, and you all are living through these experiences. And to hear the connection to Hillel and the community as a whole to provide support so we can make change happen is absolutely critical. And I am definitely pleased to be able to collaborate and partner with you all and with Debbie on all of these efforts, along with the Chief and Vice Provost Lopez and the Center for Jewish Studies. I think all of these components are critical when we talk about, addressing concerns and being able to make change happen. And I think to both of your points, some of these changes don't happen in a way that's visible all the time. And that can certainly be very challenging. But in collaboration with Chief Thompson, and I know you all know this, but this is our opportunity to share with the broader audience, we are intentional about being able to address any concerns and any complaints that come to our attention that deals with anti-Semitism. I appreciate the quote that Debbie put up as part of her presentation that really communicates and reiterates the fact that President Crow and this university does not stand by anti-Semitic behavior under any circumstances. And that is not who we are. We're an institution that focuses on access, that focuses on inclusion, and that definition is even broader than what other institutions may utilize when we talk about that. And so understanding that the fundamentals and the foundation of this institution supports our Jewish students from the beginning, and all of our students that attend this university is absolutely paramount as we have this conversation. To that point, there's always opportunity for us to involve. And the beauty about that is that we're situated in an environment where that is our charge. Our charge is to be a place where we can continue to educate, to be able to, Emily's point, have dialogue, to be able to have conversations, debate, discussions, understanding that differences will exist, but creating space to have conversation is absolutely crucial. And again, I'll echo Emily's points. Everybody's not always ready, but at the same time, that doesn't mitigate the opportunities like tonight's event to be able to create space for the dialogues and for the conversations to take place. You know, with that, my role and responsibility as the Dean of Students is to work with all of our students in order to create opportunities for education, for conversation, to address concerns in any which way possible, to work collaboratively with units across the university in support of focusing on our students' success. But to Debbie's point earlier, sometimes incidences that are connected to anti-Semitism, it's something that the impact, there's no policy, there's no, that's going to stop the impact because it's personal. And we recognize that. And to Emily's point earlier, I appreciated what she shared because sometimes we just got to listen. And we have to listen to the feelings that are connected to the impact of people's behaviors on others. And that's just as important in thinking about the healing process and working collaboratively with our students and with partners in these situations. But what I will share with you is that the number one thing I would say, and I echo Debbie's point earlier, and I believe Chief will echo this too, and then I'll pause, communicating to us that you are experiencing something or that you are the receiving end of an incident is very important. Whether there's something that is visible or not visible that gets done, communicating and sharing is important. And I really do appreciate the work that our students have been doing in elevating that level of awareness of call the Dean of Students and report it, or call, you know, ASUPD and report it. That's the starting point. And I will tell you that with that starting point, Chief Thompson and I are usually neck and neck in text messages in working collaboratively to be responsive, everything from trying to understand who, what, when, where, and simultaneously offering opportunities for connections for our students to know what the resources are on campus. And understanding that the point in time of using that resources can extend and does extend throughout the lifetime of a student's experience at the university, because everybody doesn't debrief or process in the same way. And we respect that and acknowledge that. So let me pause there and have Chief say a couple of words, and then I'm sure we'll tag team a little bit more with these resources.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Aska, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation tonight. This is something that's very important to me because since I became the chief at ASU, I have tried to make sure that everybody understands within the department that we are every bit as much of an educator as we are any kind of enforcement agency. And so it's really important to us. I mean, basically our mantra is that we are to provide a safe and secure environment for everybody to live, learn, work, and grow in. And if people don't feel safe in those environments, then it certainly affects their life, their health, their studies, mental well-being, and all those other things. And so we want to make sure that we're providing those environments, and we are addressing issues that probably most likely come from off of campus. Thank you, Kail and Emily, for your comments. You had discussed some very specific incidents that I was very intimately involved in because I was there, and I was trying to stand between Palestinian supporters and Jewish students at the IDF event, as well as Dr. Aska was there as well. And I was right there with you, Emily, encouraging, open dialogue and allow people to come in and listen to what was being said. And so I think when we have those barriers, that also, contributes to fear and anger and a lot of other things rather than, open dialogue and understanding one another. We don't have to agree with each other, right? That happens all the time. But we're at a university where we are here to learn about one another, try to understand. Again, don't have to agree with everything that's being said, but at least you have a deeper and broader understanding of where somebody might be coming from, and maybe you might change your perspective just a little bit. And if that's the case, then that's awesome. But yes, we've addressed a lot of anti-Semitic posters that were posted on the campus on one particular Sunday morning. They even slapped them on the little robots that deliver food, right? So we were down there removing those things, and we knew that they had come from somebody off of campus, which was just kind of the buildup of, all the things that we've been experiencing for the last 6 months or so. But anyway, I am honored again to be here. I love the Jewish student community. I always enjoy working with them. I always feel like I get something out of it every time. And, so I'm very responsive to everything that you guys or you all are dealing with. And, I purposely give my personal cell phone number out to the leaders of your groups so that they can call me when something comes up, and which happens quite often, or not quite often, but when something happens, they will call me. So I think best thing to do for us is just probably to let some questions be asked and see what we can do to answer those questions for you to help you understand a little bit about what we do and how we can support you.
Okay, we have some wonderful questions coming in that I'm going to pose. And again, please feel free to use the Q&A function to include your questions. This is scheduled to go until about 8:15, so we'll do as many as we can. And we'll have done a good job if we leave you wanting more. We'll come back for another conversation. This is such an important topic and such a challenging one. And again, I just want to thank all the panelists for sharing their words, and thank the attendees for being here. There's certainly a lot to cram in to an hour. So I'm going to go just here first. So we have a question from Yaron Ozer. What is being done to ensure that students who are not necessarily Jewish would attend some of the courses, the ones that Hava referenced earlier? Any knowledge on how many non-Jewish students are attending such courses? I can also speak a little bit to non-Jewish student involvement in Hillel, just as a corollary to that as well. So Hava, why don't you go first?
Okay, yeah, I'll be glad to take it. Well, actually, the truth is that I don't have percentages to give the person who posed the question, but the truth is that most of our students actually are not Jewish. So in Jewish studies courses, at least in my courses I taught mainly the medieval period. Now I teach other things, but basically 99% of the people present in the classroom were not Jewish. And actually, one of my gripes, Debbie knows it because she's heard it over the years, I would like to see more Jewish students at ASU take Jewish studies courses. And the two ladies here are invited to start with you. So the point is that actually some of the best work that we get from students in our courses is done by non-Jewish students. We have superb teachers. And we have superb students. We try to feature them. We are supporting Jewish and non-Jewish students who take our courses. We give funding to do all sorts of research projects. So in that sense, as I said about anti-Semitism, Jewish studies is not just for Jews. Jewish studies is for everybody. By the same token, anti-Semitism is not just a Jewish problem, it's a societal problem. And that's how once we understand that, then we don't sequester the Jewish studies is okay, or either the Jewish studies or the problems of the Jews, in this case, anti-Semitism, in that particular corner. So I hope I addressed the question as posed.
That might have been the first thing you ever said to me, Hava, is please get more Jewish students to take the Jewish studies courses. And that's why we partner with the Jewish Studies Center on events like this, this upcoming Friday night Shabbat that we're so excited to be doing together with a class taught by Professor Stanley Mervis. So we certainly do work together to expose Jewish students to the wonderful professors there. I'd say so Hillel reached last year 750 students, about 100 of them were not Jewish also. And so we do make concerted efforts to engage with the broader campus community. Certainly our mission is about Jewish college students. We'll make no qualms about that, but we think it's extremely important at the very basic level that students of all backgrounds feel welcome at Hillel. As I mentioned earlier, many may not have two Jewish parents or formal Jewish upbringing, and it's very important that they feel connected. And it's really important also that students feel comfortable bringing their non-Jewish roommates, classmates, friends from work, whatever it is to expose them. Last week we had an interfaith Shabbat in partnership, or 2 weeks ago, in partnership with many other campus faith-based groups. And so we do work really hard to connect with other students from other backgrounds. Hava, there was a follow-up question here. I'm trying to find it. Why do non-Jewish students say they're enrolling in Jewish studies courses? I do think that that's interesting if you have any sense of what piques their interest.
Sure. First of all, the question, the obvious answer is why not? Jewish history is the most interesting history that there is to study, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, to study Jewish history is to study global history. So, of course, there is an intellectual dimension. Another aspect that brings people in is family relations. People either have a member of the family who's Jewish, they are partially Jewish, or they're dating a Jewish person, they want to know more. So there are all those of kind of personal, societal reasons, but mostly I think they can take a course, let's say, on anti-Semitism. Like we give a course on history of anti-Semitism. They love the teacher, and then they take other courses with the same teacher. We have many students who come back again and again to our very good teachers, our very good professors, and they see the complexity, the intellectual depth, the implications. You simply cannot understand the Western civilization without the Jews, as simple as that. So there's just no way to understand the West without Jews and Judaism. So of course it's interesting, of course it's relevant. What else is there to study? That's of course a very partisan position.
Thank you so much. Okay, now I'm gonna pose a question coming in from Debbie Friedman. Great first name. Has BDS been a problem at ASU? I want to give the students a chance to speak to this because they were directly engaged with a BDS resolution last fall that came to the student government. And for those watching, BDS means Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions Movement.
Emily, do you want to answer that? Because I wasn't involved in the BDS stuff last year. I just know what's happened this year.
Yeah. So BDS did try to come to campus. Luckily, though, it was unsuccessful. It essentially came to our student government. Surprisingly enough, a Jewish senator was the one who proposed it. So that was also an interesting dynamic that the Jewish community had to, face and deal with. So fortunately it was, I don't exactly remember the voting numbers exactly, but it was shot down, very fast. But it was a huge win for us just because it also the entire Jewish community pretty much came out that night, which I thought was a really beautiful thing, is that, in the end, we will always show up for each other. Jews are, really the only ones you can rely on. As a Jewish person, we have a really solid community, right? So a lot of us showed up. There were obviously Palestinian students there, and I'm sure they faced some disappointment. I don't know exactly, but after that, there were definitely some conversations that were taking place, but luckily, it didn't go through, but it was definitely like a standing, like a sign for like our community, like, okay, like our campus is not, exempt from this. Like this is, a thing that's happening. We hear it happening at other campuses. Recently, I think it was UC Irvine that just passed a BDS resolution. And yeah, it seeks to really isolate, Jewish students. There were other groups that were trying to get a petition among the clubs to just not do events with Israel-related groups or pro-Israel groups, which obviously those groups are Jewish. So yeah.
And then speaking a little to like this year, BDS hasn't come up in student government, but there's been talk of BDS. And like for us, just it's really harmful to believe that something like that could pass in our student government, just because that targets us specifically the same way we wouldn't pass a bill that targets another country. I don't think it's fair for us to target a country that's majority Jewish.
I'll say one of the messages that I heard from student senators that were opposed to the BDS resolution was that they felt that this was a really important world issue that they weren't necessarily fully educated on enough to vote, and that they really wanted to be spending their time focused on issues that did affect the day-to-day students' lives. Now, certainly students that are advocating for BDS or advocating against for it are deeply affected on the day-to-day basis as when something like that happens on campus. And that's why we have Hillel and a lot of other wonderful resources to support those students. The question was phrased, is it a problem at ASU? I would say not more than anything about daily life is a problem. I think that there's great resources. It's a place that certainly supports free speech and encourages students to voice whatever perspectives they have, and encourages students to find productive forums to navigate those different viewpoints. Okay, Naomi Jackson. I've had very concerning conversations with Jewish students at ASU about being socially silenced and confused in terms of Jewish identity by the right and the left. On the one hand, on the right, they are seen as other, similar to immigrants, but on the left, they are seen as white and privileged, and therefore not listened to or recognized as valid voices in anti-racist discussions or presentations and performances highlighting people of color. These are subtle and also affect faculty, not just students. How can we better help students navigate this situation generally, and also if some faculty at ASU feel similarly? That's a big question. I'll just take a stab at it, but I think this is something any of us could weigh in on. And I do think that one of the big challenges with anti-Semitism is that it does come from all angles. And so just when you think you solved a flyer, then something else comes that's totally different, like Emily referenced. It's all different shapes and forms. And I think it's really challenging. I've seen Jewish students challenged in terms of entering progressive spaces and wanting to take a stance on certain social justice issues and having trouble entering those spaces because of some of the things that Naomi, you mentioned. In terms of helping students navigate it, I really think education is a big piece of that. And the thing that we found that works best is really just getting to know people one-on-one and trying to dispel some of those stereotypes. I do want to pause though and let other folks answer this. There's a piece of this question was about navigating if faculty, are expressing some of these sentiments as well. And I know that there's quite a bit of support for in terms of educational opportunities for faculty, staff, and students when it comes to this. Anyone else want to answer? Just jump right in.
Yeah, I just want to echo with Debbie what you're saying, mainly because I also understand this. Like I was saying, I try to have dialogue with people who I don't agree with or who, share different viewpoints than me. And I also think it's really, really important to essentially just, I guess, so allyship, I think that's really important, especially among other minority communities. Unfortunately, like Naomi said, we're not seen traditionally as minorities from other minorities. So that's the struggle that, we've been facing at ASU, and, that's continuing. But I do really want to stress that as students, at least, what we, can do is reach out, try to have those conversations. There's, an abundance of clubs on campus. So if, we have an interest in one club, like if we want to get to know, the Native American students on campus, like there's clubs for that where we can attend their events. So as like a student, I would say, even though it could be uncomfortable or awkward sometimes, I think it's important for us to reach out and have those conversations, because we have a lot more in common than a lot of people may think. So I think that's what students can do, at least.
Okay, thank you all. And Susan, I thank you also for asking the question about BDS. We will be sharing the recording of this also, and so folks can hear back what we said earlier about BDS, and we're just grateful for support that we get from a variety of spots around the university, as well as national organizations, to help understand the nuances of BDS and navigate it. Okay. In addition to right-wing anti-Semitism and left-wing anti-Semitism, there's also Islamic anti-Semitism. Can the panelists address this source of anti-Semitism in the world? So I think from an academic standpoint, I would certainly encourage Hava to. What I want to say to this is that that's not something that I've experienced at ASU at all. So I forgot to mention in my narration, I guess, of my own bio that I had the privilege of serving as president for the Council of Religious Advisors, CORA, at ASU, which is a wonderful professional group that many of us who serve in different religious capacities at ASU gather monthly and work with the university in formal ways. We've had very positive contributions from all the groups a part of that, including the Islamic Community Center, and are grateful for the work that we've been able to do with them. Of all the challenges that we've seen at ASU, I haven't seen this be a source of any of them, whether it comes from students or the local community.
My response to the question is basically the same I already indicated in my talk. In order to deal with Islamic anti-Semitism, we need to study it exactly as we do with Christian anti-Semitism or anti-Semitism that can come from any other source, namely history. You start with history and you figure it out. There is a very complex history behind the Quranic text, so we have to unpack that. What happened in Medina, the relationship between Muhammad and the Jews of the Hijaz at the time. It's all about history. We have to go through the rest of the complex relationship in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, then the colonization of the Middle East, then of course the emergence of the struggle to establish the state of Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as well as the Israeli-Arab conflicts. It's all part of the academic study of these complex issues. So when we do that, we have to do it again in the same methodology, interdisciplinary approach, as well as a comparative approach. I actually am very sorry that we lost a very good professor whom I hired precisely to do that kind of work. Her name was Professor Deborah Manikin, and she was hired to teach all of that cluster of complicated issues. And then unfortunately, she and her husband returned back to Israel. So we lost her and we did not replace her, unfortunately. But I agree that that topic needs to be taught. It has to be part of the curriculum. The methodology, in my view, will be the same.
Okay, we have time for one last question, and I'm going to merge a couple of questions that I've seen that seem similar. So where are students before they come to ASU? Many of them are at home with their families, grandparents, parents, aunts, uncles, siblings, and they're building up their worldview that they bring to ASU. And so we had one question from Paul. Students come to university often learning whether it's Jew hatred or Jew love or love of all people, inquiry about people, whatever. You learn who you are often from a large part from your family of origin. And so how can we support students that may have come to ASU with some challenging viewpoints? And on the flip side, we had a nice question that I just caught in the chat, just generally asking, how can parents help? And I really appreciate that there's some parents on the webinar this evening. Hillel, many of you know we love working with parents and supporting your students here at ASU. And I really appreciate this question, both sides of it. And so I want to put that out there to folks, and then we'll wrap up right after that.
I think part of what makes society really progressive is learning to work against the biases that we're taught when we're little. Everyone has parents who have biases. If you were born back in the early 1900s and your parents were still dealing with their biases from racism, if society never worked against those biases, it would never have progressed to the point where we're at today. So part of what makes us an individual is consistently challenging the biases we're taught, the things we're raised on, and learning to be free thinkers and think for ourselves, and learning what's right and wrong for ourselves. So I think that's the most important part of challenging those beliefs that you're taught as a child, is just to be a free thinker and find what's right for you.
I'd like to jump in about the parents. I think that's such a critical component, and I appreciate the individual who shared that. It's very evident that family play a critical role in supporting students. I always talk about, as a dean of students, it's a collaboration, and we all have the common goal to see our Sun Devil be successful in whatever their endeavors are. And so I always welcome the open conversation and the dialogue, even with family members, to call and say, hey, my student said this, or my student is experiencing that. How do I coach them? Where do I send them to? And I'm always happy to do that because, obviously family members have played a critical role in students' lives. And sometimes our students will listen to them more than they'll listen to anybody else, as it should be in some cases. So having the opportunity to share with family members, tell them to call the Dean of Students office, sharing with families, ASU counseling is there and they could be a resource to the student, or following up with our student advocates and our advocacy work that we do here through the Dean of Students office, or explaining even what the procedures are when there are, concerns with incidents and behaviors. So, I share with the opportunity to communicate with families about what their students may be experiencing and so forth, and then learning from them how they're coping with that, but also sharing resources with them. So collaboratively, we're supporting the student. So, we very much welcome family involvement. And there's the other side of it, right? There's events and activities or conversations that we want families to be a part of so they could participate in the dialogue, because we know, as we've talked about, these issues are not just manifesting themselves on college campuses. These are societal things that we're dealing with. And so however which way ASU could utilize all of the phenomenal resources like what Hava has been sharing with the educational classes and so forth, however which way we could extend those assets out to our community, I think is so critical. And then in partnership with Hillel and all of its community members to kind of do that exchange of information and dialogue, as Emily's been echoing. So I can't reiterate it enough. The collaboration with families is critical to our collective success and seeing our students, achieve their goals.
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Just when speaking about families and all the different people with diverse roles that play a role in student success at ASU. I think that's one of the first things I was taught when I came to ASU, is that we're a community because we all take a different role in supporting students, and especially because ASU is so large, it's so important that everyone in the ASU community truly does what they can to support students, and to speak up, and whether it's contacting the dean's office or anyone else. I did put in the chat the link to the ASU Hillel Families Facebook group. That's a great way if you're looking specifically to connect with other Jewish families, or to learn more about how you can support Jewish students. We're encouraging families to connect with each other and share ways that families might offer support to students across the country. And it's something that we're actually very eager to learn more about how Hillel can support families and parents. And so to that end, we're very excited about a partnership with ASU Family Program. Sunday, March 7th, we'll be having a coffee conversation on Zoom to meet families and hear more about how we can support you. If you join our Facebook group, you'll see more about that information and how to register for that event. Thank you all so much for being here this evening. Thank you to our wonderful panel. Thank you to Lisa Kaplan, the Assistant Director at Jewish Studies, who organized all of this behind the scenes and made it possible for it to be a smooth experience for all of us panelists and all of you guests. And have a wonderful evening.